Hi everyone, my name is Lucy and I recently graduated from Harvard's PhD program in neuroscience. This video is about how to write a strong statement of purpose. I'm going to cover what a statement of purpose is and why it's one of the most important aspects in your graduate school application. I'm going to talk about what to include in your statement of purpose and how to structure it. I'm going to give some general tips on what to do and what not to do. And finally, watch till the end because I'm going to share my own statement of purpose that got me into schools like Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Columbia, and more. And I'm going to break it down and analyze it according to the guidelines that I'm sharing with you today. So before we begin, I want to share why I'm making this video. During my PhD, I served as a student interviewer for Harvard's program in neuroscience. What that means is that I helped interview students during the application process. And as a result, I've read a lot of strong personal statements from top candidates. Additionally, over the course of my PhD, I helped over 60 people get into top grad schools by editing their essays and helping them with their application strategy. So what I'm sharing with you today is everything that I've learned about how to write a strong statement of purpose that will highlight your research experience and help get you into top graduate schools. So with that, let's begin. So what is the statement of purpose? The statement of purpose is one of the main essays that PhD programs will ask you to write. And the goal is for the admissions committee to evaluate your previous research experience as well as your goals for the future and fit for the school. The prompts across schools might vary in their language, but most of them are asking for three specific things. Why do you want to come to the school? Your preparation for the PhD, aka your research experiences, and what you want to do in the future in your research and your career. Now, it's important to distinguish this from a medical school essay, where applicants usually talk more about their personal life story and experiences that led them to medical school. For the statement of purpose for PhD applications, it gets much more to the point about just your research and why your research has prepared you to enter this PhD program. As an application reviewer, what I'm looking for is whether you can talk about your research and yourself like a scientist, and whether you have the characteristics that it takes to survive 5 to 6, sometimes 7 or 8 years of your PhD. All right, let's talk about what you should include in your statement of purpose. So even though the statement of purpose is not really about your personal trajectory, it's okay to write a sentence or two about how you got interested in the field of research that you're in. But beware, there are a lot of cliche stories that people will share that are often overused, such as, I got interested in biology because a family member was sick. I got interested in cancer because my grandfather had cancer. Feel free to include a personal motivation for why you got into science, but keep it brief. The next part of your statement of purpose is about your previous research experience. So in this section, you're going to want to summarize your main research experiences, each in their own paragraph. So for example, if you have worked in 2 different labs over the course of your research career, then you're going to talk about the project or projects you worked on in each of the labs in their own paragraph. Now for each paragraph, you're going to want to mention specific things about your research, but without getting overly technical or too into the details. I like to follow a 6-sentence structure for this paragraph that goes like this. The first sentence should give context to when you joined the research group and where the research group is, like at what school, as well as the research question or topic that you are investigating. The second sentence should detail what your hypothesis was. The third sentence should talk about what you did, the methods of the research, and also highlight your specific role in the project if it was a collaborative effort. The fourth sentence should summarize what the main findings, results, or conclusions were from the work. The fifth sentence should summarize what you generally learned from this research experience. This can range from skills such as certain lab techniques, all the way to general understanding and conclusion about research in the field. For example, you can talk about the fact that you learned that research is nonlinear and doesn't always work out, and so a lot of trial and error is involved. And finally, the 6th and last sentence should describe any outcomes resulting from your work. For example, talks that you've given, conferences that you attended to present the work, and any publications or manuscripts resulting from the work. Now, what I'm looking for as an application reviewer is whether you're able to talk about your science like a scientist. Are you able to contextualize the topic and its significance in the broader context of the field? Are you able to show me that you can work independently and that you understand what research takes? I also look for whether you have intellectually contributed to your research, as opposed to just following the instructions that your PI or professor told you. After you finish writing one paragraph for each of your main research experiences, you're going to write another paragraph transitioning into talking about why you want to do a PhD and what you might want to study in your PhD. You can also talk about how, through your research experiences, your interests have evolved to be focused on this one particular topic that you want to spend the next 5 to 7 years studying. I usually try to encourage people to find that sweet spot between being too broad and being too specific, because ultimately you're going to have to join a research group with a supervisor who is willing to advise you to explore this particular research topic or question that you're interested in. I think the best research experiences tie together how their past research experiences influence their current and future research interests, and how that drives them to want to explore this new particular field or subtopic of research. And finally, you're going to want the last paragraph of your statement of purpose to talk about why you want to come to this particular school. Now, the advice I always give for this paragraph is if you could replace the school name with another school's name and have the paragraph still make sense, then you're not being specific enough to the program. Do some research about this PhD program. Be sure to mention specific faculty you would be interested in working with. I usually recommend mentioning at least 2 to 3 faculty that you would be interested in working with, and why. To be more specific about the school, you can mention resources, journal clubs, collaborations, or different interdisciplinary centers or departments that you would be interested in working with that would make the school a good fit for you. Ultimately, answering the question of why this school mainly comes down to the faculty, because obviously if you want to work with certain faculty, they're only located at that certain school. And so I would try to focus your efforts on understanding what the faculty member's research is and how that connects to your past research experiences or your future research interests. All right, now I want to talk about general do's and don'ts for the statement of purpose. Like I briefly mentioned in the last section, you don't want your opening personal story to be too cliché or too overly dramatic. I think you need to keep in mind that professors who are reviewing applications often have to read hundreds of them, and so writing anything that's a bit cliché or generic is not going to make you stand out. Another thing that I would try to avoid is passive voice. So examples of passive voice are, "This enabled me," "This taught me." I would recommend rephrasing sentences with active voice. For example, "Through this, I learned." "Through this, I gained." These are small details that I think change the way that someone perceives you when they read your application. Active voice comes out much stronger and with much more agency, making you sound more confident and in control of your own narrative. One thing that you should do is to provide concrete examples whenever you're trying to highlight some personal quality of yours. For example, rather than saying that you are resilient or that you work independently, you can instead give an example about how you overcame some challenge in your research or you didn't get discouraged when experiments failed. To show initiative, for example, you can talk about how you scoured the literature in order to figure out how to approach the particular research question you were working on. I would definitely read over your statement many times to make sure there are no spelling or grammatical errors. Using AI to help polish your statements, to vary your sentence length, and help make your statement more readable and clear can be a good idea, but I would not over-rely on AI to help you write your statement of purpose. Another thing that I would recommend you to do is to read your statement of purpose out loud. If you find yourself struggling to get through a sentence because it is too long, then that's a sign that you need to vary up your sentence length, maybe split that sentence into 2 different sentences. Remember that having a statement that is very readable is also really important because often application reviewers read these statements in a matter of minutes, and you wouldn't want them to struggle getting through the content. All right, now that you know how to write a statement of purpose, I'm going to show you my own statement of purpose that got me into Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and many other schools that I applied to, and break it down sentence by sentence to show you how I implemented these tips. I'll also tell you what I wish I'd done differently now that I know so much more about statement of purposes. Hi everyone, from the inside of my computer. This is the statement of purpose that got me into Harvard's PhD program in neuroscience. And I will actually link this down below so you can access it as a Google document. I'm going to go over my statement of purpose and highlight specific examples of where I followed my own advice. So let's jump right into it. So as you can see, I chose to start off my statement of purpose with a general paragraph about my future career goals. Now, there's no exact right or wrong way to start your statement of purpose, but I just felt that putting this statement of my career goals and research interests up front was a very confident and forward way to start my statement of purpose. In the next paragraph, you can see that I talked a little bit, but not too much, about how I got interested in neuroscience. So I said, inspired by my 13 years of training as a classical pianist, I became fascinated with how the brain processes complex perceptual sequences and learns sophisticated motor sequences. And so after that, I jumped straight into my first research experience. So this particular paragraph is about my research experience at the first school. So curious as to how our brains guide our interactions with the world, I declared a major in cognitive sciences in college and joined Dr. A's lab at School A in my freshman year to investigate how brains processed sensory information. Okay, so this sentence tells me that my curiosity about this particular thing drove me to major in cognitive sciences in college and then join my first research group in my freshman year. So even though all this information is on my CV, it's helpful to contextualize it and put this information in this paragraph of when you joined the group so that the application reviewer can very quickly associate how long you were in this group with what you did there and link that to the information on your CV. So in this sentence, I also talk about what the overall topic or research question was. So it was to investigate how brains process sensory information. Now, if I were to go back, I might have been a little bit more specific about what the specific research question was and what my hypothesis was, because in the next sentence, I actually just jumped directly into what I did, so the methods. So I said, in the A lab, I designed and implemented a psychophysical experiment where human subjects made duration judgments on multisensory stimuli to investigate how the brain uses context to inform multisensory perception. Okay, so in this sentence, I tell you concretely what I did, what I contributed to the study. And I also elaborated a little bit more about the research questions. So we were trying to understand how the brain uses context to inform multisensory perception. Now, the next sentence is what I found from this research. I found that the same multisensory cues produce different depending on the context in which they were presented. And so that was my result. And then the next sentence actually deviates a little bit from the structure I talked about, but that's because I actually organized this essay in chronological order to how I actually experienced the timeline of events. So here I said, with data in hand, I recognize the need to gain experience in computational modeling of behavior, as no previous model in the multisensory literature could explain the pattern of interactions that we had observed. Now, this sentence highlights a couple different things. So the first is that I was curious enough to read the literature and figure out that there was no model that was sufficient to explain the data. And so that shows my initiative in going out to learn things on my own. And also it reflects my development as a scientist, where I start thinking about this project for myself and trying to chart future directions of the project by myself. Now, this goes into a bit of a narrative about how I learned more about computational neuroscience. So the gist of it is that I went to attend this computational neuroscience conference in my sophomore year, and I talk about what I learned from that conference. I learned that it's important for experimentalists and theorists to collaborate. And because of this experience, I started adding quantitative courses into my undergraduate curriculum because I wanted to learn more about computational models. And so again, this paragraph is not necessarily about research, but it gives more context to my evolution as a scientist and is true to the progression of events that actually happened. So this next paragraph is about my second research experience. So here I give, again, some context that I met this professor at this conference that I just talked about. And so as a result, I actually went to that person's group at School B as a part of a summer research program to investigate a new topic. And so you can read this paragraph for yourself. Again, I won't go into super detail, but it follows the same general structure where I talk about what exactly I did in the research, what my contributions were. And then I talked about the result and conclusion of this work. I didn't really interpret the result. I just said that I could create a model to explain subjects' bias. But if I were to go back and change this, I might have added a sentence to contextualize the findings in the greater literature and say why what I found was important and what we can conclude from my results. You can see here that I also talked about the outcomes of my research in this paragraph. So I said I presented my work as a poster and a talk at Conference B. And also I mentioned that I've continued working with Dr. B to prepare a first authored manuscript of my work. So here I highlight this example because you don't necessarily have to have published a paper in order to say that your intent is to turn it into a paper. And I think even stating that shows that you are driven to bring the work to completion. But I would only recommend you say this if there's actually a pretty high chance that you would turn your project into a paper and it's not just something you're hopefully wishing for. Then I talked about how I brought the skills that I learned from School B back to my research in Lab A. So then here's another paragraph that concludes the research in Lab A that I began in a previous paragraph. And here I talked about that after my research experience in Lab B, I had what I needed to finish my work in Lab A. And then I also talked about where I was able to present this research, which are the outcomes of my research. And I talked about how I wrote my neuroscience honors thesis on this research and also was about to submit a first authored manuscript of the research. Then this paragraph summarizes my experience at School C. In this particular paragraph, I talk about how I wanted to try something different. So all my experience had been in behavior and modeling, but I wanted some wet lab research experience. I wanted to actually go and record neurons in the brain. And so that was my motivation to join Dr. C's lab at School C as part of this program. And again, I talked about what the question was or the topic was of the research. I talked about what I did, and then I talked about what I found, and then I talked about what the outcomes of my research are. Okay, then the next paragraph here summarizes what I learned in general from my experiences at A, B, and C. So I said my experiences at A, B, and C equipped me with the skills necessary to articulate my research questions and to design robust experiments to answer them. Okay, here's one comment about passive voice. So like I said, passive voice is anything that goes like verb me. So something that happened to you. If I were to rewrite the sentence with active voice, I would say, through my experiences at A, B, and C, I gained the skills necessary to articulate my research questions. So you see, just a very small change in the wording of your sentence can help change it from passive to active voice. And I just think that is a small detail that really changes the way that somebody perceives you. I definitely feel like when I read essays written all in active voice, that the person who's writing it sounds more confident and more in control of their narrative to me. And then I talked about what I learned in general from research. So this is important too, to highlight the fact that I understand that doing a PhD is difficult, and yet I still want to do it and that I'm prepared for it. So I said that I learned that research is challenging and fulfilling. Despite failed experiments and the level of persistence and patience required, I still remain driven because of the satisfaction that comes from inquiry and discovery. And so I talk about how this drives me to continue on with my education, where I plan to continue building on my research skills to conduct impactful neuroscience research. These last two paragraphs are answering the question of why this school. So in this paragraph, you can see that I talk about different professors that I would like to work with. So for example, I say, in particular, Dr. Alpha's research resonates with my interest in using a range of behavioral, imaging, and computational approaches to understand the cortical microcircuits involved in sensory decision-making. So here, I'm not only highlighting that I have done some research and know what this person works on, but I'm relating that to my own interests. So I'm basically saying that what they're interested in is what I'm interested in, and that's why we make a good match. I give some more detail in what I would be able to learn in this person's group. And then I also talk about a second professor whose research I really am interested in. And then I talk actually about two more professors that I would be interested in collaborating with, and state my intent to do rotations in these groups. And also I mentioned the fact that I've actually talked to and communicated with two of these professors regarding our mutual research interests. Now, the last paragraph here is just, again, showing that I have done my research about this school and that I know that there are certain resources and certain departments that this program is related to and affiliated with. And I basically end the statement talking about how the program in neuroscience will equip me with the skills and resources to become a better scientist to do the research that I want to do. So there you have it. That's my entire statement of purpose that got me into Harvard's program in neuroscience and all the other schools that I applied to. I hope that this is a great concrete example for you to base your statement of purpose off of. And please let me know if you have any questions about this particular statement. Like I said, I will link this statement down below for you to read it in more detail for yourself. And I hope this helps you craft your own unique statement of purpose. So that's it for this statement of purpose video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and let me know what other PhD application videos you guys would like to see from me. I'd really appreciate if you could like this video and subscribe and share with a friend who's applying to graduate school this year.